All right, guys, welcome back to the Fitness in Philosophy podcast. My name is Robbie Gustin, and I'm joined, as always, by OPEX Fitness founder James Fitzgerald. James, how are you doing today?
I'm good, Robbie. Thanks. Thanks for welcoming me onto the show.
No
It's great to
problem.
be here. What episode is it today? 14?
13.
13.
Last time was 12, so yeah.
Oh, yes. Yeah, 13. Well, to the ages, 13's a really mystical number, isn't it?
Yeah.
And kind of, mysterious number. But hey, it's like the start of that move away from the nest in regards to chronological age and human development. That age 13 is, interesting little people at that point in time.
Yeah, it's interesting how in certain cultures, like, in the Jewish tradition with like a bar mitzvah or something like that, or
Hmm.
how at one point that was kind of the age, and then, it kind of migrated to 18, and now there's, kind of that 20 to 30. It's interesting watching the
Yeah,
development over time.
yeah. I just had that discussion the other day of, what let's call adulthood was considered 500 years ago. It was, it's different in terms of the expectations and what currently someone is expected to do socially at 15 years of age today is quite different than 500 years ago.
Yeah, dramatically so. And yeah, probably has a lot to do with like the length of, at least partially, the length of time lived on average. But yeah.
Yeah, well, yeah, I guess that's an interesting topic for another time. Yeah, I think it's definitely the environment that had to do with that. I think that's one thing that has to be taken into consideration for it. But and the growth of the brain relative to what's in the environment could dictate that. But yeah, I got some other thoughts on that. I don't think the brain is that advanced actually over 500 years. It just seemingly looks like we can partake in absorbing more information, but you have to define, I guess, what better is, I guess.
Yeah, interesting. That'd be
Yeah,
a cool. That'd be a cool one to discuss.
yeah, but that's not for today. Today's an exciting one. We haven't you and I discussed this back room, so people could know. Maybe give them some insight into what we do pre podcast. This first time we've done this. Thought or shared this is that we with Robbie's guidance and competency in the areas of particular investigation inside of philosophy, he lays out, a conceptual a word and an idea, and then we try to see where that fits in two areas: how philosophy works around it, and then how fitness can be inside of that, so that we can get to our goal of fitness inside of philosophy as being our long-term objective for this. So we had, Robbie just this past week, as usual, hands over the information and says, "This is the direction how we want to, move the ship in this way." And we were both fairly excited to talk about this. So if that's the case, then let's get at it and see what comes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think both you and I, like, we love concepts like, truth and knowledge and autonomy. And I love discussing that stuff, but I think it's also, to your point of what we were saying earlier, like we're both excited. It's always exciting to discuss it in a realm where, it also can have a lot more practical relevance. And when we get into these big issues of how do we shift society at large in such a way that we either lead to the betterment of humans through fitness, and what role does, the government play in that? So just, yeah,
Mhm.
super interesting questions.
Yeah, I think that, yeah, as you're saying that, I think that it's a nice reflection, Robbie, because it makes us go, well, why are we excited about this particular topic? And I think for me, I'll speak for myself only, that um, it's something that I am very curious about because it inspires something deeper than myself, to think about and contemplate. So when I discuss the concept of just liberties and freedoms, and where especially where physical freedom comes in, I just go into myself and go, wow, the whole concept of it, the idea of freedom as a word all by itself, to me, just personally inspires me. But then, I even get really jazzed up because the awakening of a number of other people to that concept, I really believe is a very challenging proposition, but would be, I think, a remarkable accomplishment to wake people up to that concept of it. We will what we will work on in terms of fitness freedom and how we name that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, for me, I mean, I would share those sentiments. I would say that when I used to teach political philosophy, one of the things that happens today, especially, I guess in our current culture where these debates get very heated and people get very entrenched, when you reflect upon what the debate is actually about, it actually ties back to these very deep and fundamental questions about what is the role of government in someone's life? Is it just to ensure that they can essentially not be attacked and go about their business, or is it to bring about the good or the right life? And there are positives and negatives of each, and it's not as simple as just saying one's dumb and the other's not. So for people who are not sure whether philosophy actually has a use or relevance, like, I can assure you that any discussion you want to have in politics has a very deep connection to deeper philosophical questions about justice or equality or things like that, and
Yeah,
liberty.
yeah, and I think because it also just indirectly asks you to take a second, and just lay a bunch of different things on the table and find this nice balance between what your emotions, right, and what logic is saying is in place. So I think that's what philosophy acts as, is this fantastic opportunity to take any particular topic and for it warrants discussion and it warrants dialogue, and it basically says that we're actually not looking for a particular orthodoxy. We're looking for, or even a hierarchy. We're looking for just an opportunity to jam on ideas and to maybe come up with some of the things that are going to work for you particularly, and we'll still leave and have the exact same beliefs that are different to one another. You know what I'm saying? And it all, in the end, uh, may work out with that questioning, right? So
Yeah.
that's why I
uh,
appreciate it.
yeah, I agree. And one of the analogies I would sometimes use with my students was philosophy is kind of like intellectual travel. Like, I think we've all had the experience where we go to a different country and it's like, oh, they do that way. But sometimes that's better in a lot
Yeah.
of ways. And it's like you just get so enmeshed in your own set of conceptual possibilities that you don't realize, oh, why don't we just toss an assumption out and do something different? So
Yeah.
philosophy is kind of like that for the mind, I find.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Such a great example. Intellectual travel. I love it. I had used that as a placeholder idea to strategize around a couple of different words with our gyms, our OPEX gyms this past week. Um, so using, I guess, like it could be incorrectly called, Robbie, but I used what was called a metaphorical hypothesis, allowing people to just stretch their brain on what could possibly be a case of something. To your point, like intellectual travel, it allows you to get out and see that there are differences, that there are and anyways, it was a really great, very uncomfortable. I just wanted to make mention of that because even when you do travel, as an example, there are some things that you got to be prepared for. If you're not good at adaptation, right? If you're not good for, oh geez, I travel to London and I feel tired, right? And you're just going to be a whiny little bugger about it for 3 days. It's like, you know, you're probably not going to be able to adapt some of the things. No, the point I'm making though is that it was very uncomfortable to do that travel because some people have never practiced it. So that's why philosophy is also not in practice something you just step into and it's like, oh, this is fantastic. You have to recognize how well you adapt to these really challenging ideas, right? And challenging concepts. And I'll keep going with it just as an example, analogy. I'm reading this book called The Art of Choosing right now by Sheena Iyengar, and she's blind, but she's done this tremendous amount of research on choice and control and kind of words that you and I love, like self-governance and autonomy and sovereignty. And the practice that she had in there, that she gets people to recognize these differences, is understanding the individualism and collectivism differences in thoughts, and how in geography, back to your point on travel, how that, really opens up people's minds. So she gave examples where people travel to Japan, and this individualist style of thinking that they bring with them, and they get there and they're like, I don't understand how you work, live, have community. Like, they can't get it because they don't understand how to put their mind in their place in that area with a different thinking, if that makes sense. So that's all to back up to say that when you do this travel intellectually, you got to be prepared to be open-minded.
Yeah, and it's going to get, I don't want to scare people off, but I mean, at times it gets uncomfortable. At times, yeah, I've had that so many times when studying philosophy, where it's like, here's this, cherished belief, whatever it may be, and as philosophers, we try not to have too many of those because we know they get slung down. But you still have some of them, and then there's this argument that comes along, and it's like, whoa, okay, well, why did I believe that, and what are the implications of me tossing that out, and what do I do now? So not all philosophy is like that. I mean, some of it can be revelatory and celebration, feel great, but I mean, just like with travel, where you're like, whoa, what have I been doing?
Yeah.
Sometimes you get into that.
Yeah.
So,
anyhow, thanks everyone for going along a little journey there with that one.
Yeah.
Before we get going on the topic.
Oh yeah. All right, guys. So before we talk about liberty, and I feel like it's a running joke on our podcast, but that's okay. These things require lots of discussion. This is probably going to be a 2, maybe even a 3-parter. We'll probably do it later down the line. There's a lot to discuss here.
Yeah.
But just as an intro, I want to talk about political philosophy first and what it does, and then we can talk about liberty. So political philosophy, as you might imagine, asks deep philosophical questions about politics, things that people engaged in politics may occasionally ask, but they're more enmeshed in the actual business of politics. So sometimes it's hard to step back. So this is where political philosophy comes in. So things like, what is justice? What's the best form of government? Plato's Republic, which in many ways is kind of the foundation of Western philosophy, is in a lot of ways a work of political philosophy, where he talks about the pros and cons of democracy and tyranny and all these different things. Are liberty and equality compatible? Are liberty and safety compatible? These are all things, rah, 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 safety, awesome, great, we want it. We want equality too, we want liberty. But there are ways in which these don't always mesh with one another, right? We could all be a whole lot more safe if there were cameras everywhere. But that infringes upon this intrinsically worthwhile thing called liberty. What's the most important role of government? We'll talk about this a lot today. Is it just to ensure our ability to freely move about and pursue what we want? Or is it to help us cultivate the good or the right life? Is it to positively promote that? There's one conception of liberty, which we'll talk about, according to which government is just there to protect us from foreign threats and to make sure no one else is stealing from us or, killing or doing any of that other stuff. And then government should just get out of the way. And then there's another conception of government according to which, no, the role of a government should be to help humans flourish, to help them lead the right life. What's the relationship, if any, between legality and morality? People act as though these two are the same or similar. They are related, but they are 100% not the same, nor should they be. So what's the relationship there? Under what conditions is social disobedience morally justified? It would seem to be a moral precept that you should, generally obey the laws of the society under which you live. But of course, what about when those laws are unjust? Like in different places where, people say women shouldn't be able to drive or something like that, or, laws that seem unjust. So those are some of the questions that we can get into with political philosophy. And then just one more that I just remembered I didn't mention that I think is so crucial. This question to me really sums up a lot of people's political leanings. What should we do about the brute facts? Meaning just like it's a fact. There's really nothing we can do about it for the most part. But there are questions about what we can do as a society. A large part of our lives is due to luck. We don't choose who our parents are. We don't choose our height. We don't choose our innate athletic ability. We don't choose our innate intelligence. We don't choose whether our parents went to college. We don't choose whether they have money. And yet, all of those things have a profound effect upon our lives. Now, as a society, we can't change someone's height. We can't change someone's innate intellectual ability. We can't change their innate athletic ability. But we can do things to make it so that someone whose parents didn't go to college or don't have money aren't doomed as a result. So there's a really deep and profound question there about, some people say, well, that's the luck of the draw, deal with it.
Mm-hmm.
Free will, choice, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. And then there's another side that says, well, as a society, we should be involved in trying to make it so that there's some sort of safety net so that people, through no fault of their own, are, doomed essentially for the rest of their life. So those are some questions that political philosophy discusses. And I'm just going to pause right there, James, in case you have any thoughts or questions or anything you want to add.
Yeah, no, just in addition to the last point there, I think that's where we're going to go mainly for today. Is some other things to think about in there too, is that some of the things we don't know as well, that are interesting, or what I would call unknowns in how do we, there's no well observed facts around, long-term investigation and work put into like, opportunities for fitness, right? Or opportunities for waking people up to the concept of fitness. This is where I'm going on, instead of just saying luck or how you've, just landed and you're like, oh, you got a Peloton and you're on the 37th floor. Well, great, good for you. And then there's like, well, some don't even know that it could be within them to improve it. They don't know that they may have the choice to make some very small adjustments that can get them to a certain spot. So what I mean is that we also don't know what it's like to, I think what we need to discuss too is what I'm calling intervention. Like what results in intervention, and how much work really is that? And can that really act as a quote unquote lean startup to like get people to this awareness, right? That they do have these things that are available to them, that they can get educated and become competent in these particular skills for health and fitness. So that's one thing we don't know, right? We don't know. We could easily just say on historical context of these two different beliefs, like this is just where it ends up. But I think there's more than that. So that's one area that, I think we need a bit more of investigation inside. And and I'll just stop there because I think down the road we're going to get to this what I think is the big nugget to try to rock is like it's not around what we have to work with and the system that's in place in order to get people awake to that. I think it comes down to possibly leaning up against what I like to call what you're physically capable of, and then experiences inside of that. And I think that's an easy way to kind of get people let's call it leveled up to this level of freedom that they're going to have. And then, Robbie, we don't have to get into all the uncomfortable spots, right? Well, not that we don't want to today, but we don't have to get into the uncomfortable spots of saying like, well, these people know that there's some positivity in that, and they know it's going to lead to health and fitness, but and it's available, and they have a choice, and everyone, there's Google and YouTube and et cetera, and but they're choosing not to do it, right? But we're all trying to be in the same room, and so then it always ends up in the uncomfortable conversation of like, well, what should they be doing if it impedes on my freedoms based upon what I want to do, right? And that's where we need to discuss like, well, what are those impedances, right? And what does that mean? And then when you get the crisscross of being in the same room under the same guidelines, right? Which is taxes and just operating as operating civility.
Civilly, yeah.
Yeah.
No, I think that's a very important point, and like you said, we'll get to discussing that, but that's exactly where the crux of the issue comes in. And there are lots of different ways in which you can discuss it, but of course, in our case, we'll be discussing it with relation to fitness.
Mm.
Again, on one conception of the role of government, if someone wants to stay home and eat Cheetos and not do anything, that is their right, and it may be very good for them to engage in exercise and eat healthy, but for all sorts of reasons, but that's not the role of government to say anything one way or the other about that. And then there's another conception according to which, well, you could say it just because it's the good life, that's something we should pursue, or you can even couch it in terms of, potential harm in terms of, well, this person doing that collectively raises all of our health insurance prices. Do you know what I mean? There's those debates and arguments as well. So what constitutes harm in such a way that we would want to legislate either in terms of laws or taxes to affect people's behavior?
Yeah. I also, I just remembered, thank you for that. I also remembered this, where I think it has to somewhere come in the conversation, and let me know if it's not going to be time for it or move to another time, but this unspoken or I guess lost virtue of optimizing one's life. Like if we know that, no matter what your mental capabilities are and your physical capabilities, there are high-end constraints. But if we have observed, like you and I have observed, just being in the fitness zeitgeist, that there's billions of people who don't go from step 2 to 3 to 4 out of 10 in their lifetime, right? Yet we know that they have an opportunity to get to 9.5 out of 10. It's there. They have the opportunity to do it, and maybe some of those people did it back in the day when they owned a farm and built homes and provided for their families. You know what I'm saying? They physically and cognitively had to work within these, really challenging spots. They probably operated at an optimal level, right? 9 out of 9, 9.5 out of 10 for at least 55 years, until water and medication and sanitation came along. But you get my point, is that I think we need to somehow put that into the conversation today too, of why don't we go after this higher order concept of a beacon of optimizing, and then we don't land in previous historical context garbage, or get into the determinism and where this all comes from and what you have available and choice. It could just be well, why don't we all agree that we all want to go towards this optimum level of being, and then just through experience those things will figure themselves out.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's exactly the crux of the issue. And so, even if we could all agree to that, then there's that question that we're going to be talking about deeply today. Should the government have any role whatsoever in that, or not? Is that just a personal virtue thing? Is that something, famous example, giving to charity, super good thing to do. But the argument would be it's not the role of government to say one way or the other whether we should. Same thing with eating healthy or smoking cigarettes or what have you. So that's really the crux of the issue when it comes to the liberty discussion.
Yeah. Also to think about, we don't know where our users are, but we could probably add that in a bit to the conversation too, Robbie, not users, listeners. Starting to sound like big tech there. Where our listeners are, they could be in different countries around the world where their government institutions and what the free society is completely different than the way we're discussing. So we want to let everyone know we're not ignorant in that. It's just we're using this as a base support as to what our experiences are to ask the questions around government influence inside of living the largest life possible.
I think that's a very important point to keep in mind, because 21st century North America is not the context of all time and all places. So all right, so let's talk a little bit about what liberty is. So quick dictionary definitions: the power to do as one pleases, freedom from arbitrary restraint, the positive enjoyment of various social, political, and economic rights, and the power of choice. Now, if you're listening to that and saying, well, those all sound similar, but some of them are different, you're right. Because, and that's what we're going to talk about, is that there are these different conceptions of liberty. It's not just the absence of constraint. It can also have to do with living the good or the best life. So what are some examples of, famous liberties that we can talk about? At least, again, we know this hyper local, but 21st century North America: freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of religion. And those are not shared everywhere by any means. But those would be some famous examples. Now, something we have to be really clear on that I think gets lost in the debate, especially on the kind of I guess what you might call the super libertarian side of things, where it's just rah, rah, rah liberty as much as possible. And that can be good, of course, but we are entitled to the maximum liberty possible, ... that is compatible with the maximum liberty possible for others. So in other words, you don't have the right to buy a tank and drive it on the wrong side of the road down the street. Even though we have freedom of speech, you can't yell fire in a crowded theater. So people need to recognize that, liberty means liberty that is compatible with the maximum possible liberty for others. Now, the most important philosophical question here that's really tough, of course, is what does that mean? Is secondhand smoke an infringement upon your liberty? Is not having car insurance infringement upon my liberty? Do you know what I mean? All those types of things. So I'll pause there for a second, see if you have any thoughts.
Yeah, no, I'm just excited to get into, where we're going to be and how fitness lands in that, and just, I think it's going to get us to questioning the importance of that and the importance of health. And again, I don't mind doing it, but it's going to bring us back to well, if we define what health is and we define what optimizing is and we create pillars, right? Locomotion, resilience, perception, and cognition, perception, locomotion, resilience. And those as the pillars basically we can work towards. Then we can then start to say that, yeah, you have all the liberties as you wish to partake in going, that route. But also if you do not participate in it and you choose not to do that and go towards that optimal, then how does that work for all of us, right? How does that work for all of us in what we want to do? So I'm interested in that.
Yeah, agreed. I am too. So let's talk a little bit briefly about why is liberty important. It's to be able, to do as we wish with our life, to not be subject to the whims or forces of tyranny or things outside of us. And going back to a previous episode we did, liberty is a necessary precondition for autonomy. You can't really be autonomous if you don't even have this first conception of the absence of constraint. How can someone be autonomous if they're up in chains or arrested for publishing an article or so forth?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so now let's talk about negative versus positive liberty. And this is really where, if you guys are wondering where the fitness connection is, connects to a lot of the stuff we already discussed, but it really connects here. So negative liberty is the absence of obstacles, barriers, and constraints. So this does not mean negative in the pejorative sense of bad or wrong or evil. It just means the absence of something. So it's typically applied to individuals. And the idea is that you have liberty, or you are free to the extent that you are not constrained under the rule of a tyrant, or no one's forcing you with mind control or drugs or any one of these crazy philosophy thought experiments that people drum up to do something. Now, with anything in philosophy, there are pluses and minuses here. So pluses of negative liberty: it guards against potential authoritarianism, paternalism, the idea that someone would know better than you what's good for your life.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not using this term. This has no indication of what I personally believe or otherwise. It's just the term that gets used, the so-called nanny state. So the idea here being, look, so a famous example from when I was in college in New York City was, Mike Bloomberg, the mayor, put into effect a rule about you're not allowed to sell, it wasn't big gulps because not every place has a big gulp, but you're not allowed to sell sodas above a certain size.
Yeah.
And the big debate, of course, back and forth was, well, this isn't like secondhand smoke, right? secondhand smoke has objective, verifiable, like you are in my direct vicinity, you are going to get health issues as a result. Someone drinking a 64-ounce soda or 128-ounce soda, it's really bad for them, and maybe it's bad for our health insurance system. But ooh, man, we gotta draw those red yarn strings really thick to make this argument that it's infringing upon someone else's liberty. So that's really where you get into that piece right there. The negatives there are that it's well, I guess it depends on what view you take, but it's the absolute bare minimum conception of government. So the idea here, if you take it to its logical extreme, government should have a standing army to protect us from foreign threats, should have a judicial system with police and judges and lawyers and all the rest of that. But aside from that, it should get out of the way. It has a deep epistemological skepticism about the ability of government to know what's right or good, and its ability to implement it. And thus the idea is, look, we are all free to pursue a conception of good, and the government's role is just to protect us in doing that. So I'll just pause there for a second, see if anything you want to say one way or the other.
I'm being educated as we go, so I really like it. I read it, but I'm now getting it, so I appreciate it.
Oh, no problem.
Yep.
So another way to phrase this is that a central feature of the negative conception of liberty is that we can't and shouldn't impose personal growth from the outside. We've all experienced this as kids too. I mean, this is not a perfect analogy, but we've all had times when we were kids when we thought, I'm my own person. Why are my parents trying to impose this on me? And then maybe later in life you recognize, okay, well, they had a good reason. And maybe you're like, well, sometimes they didn't. But the idea eventually is when you're adult that you should be able to choose whether you eat healthy, avoid cigarettes, wear a seatbelt, or give to charity. We could, you and I probably agree that all those things are good, but whether they're good or not is a separate question from whether government should have a role to play. And this is where people get confused. They say, well, how could you possibly argue that someone shouldn't wear a seatbelt? No one's arguing that someone shouldn't wear a seatbelt, although maybe some people do. We can all grant that that's a good and better thing to do. But what we're asking is, should the government have a role in legally penalizing people and saying, well, you're not doing this thing that's just going to harm you and no one else? And that's the crux of the issue, right? What constitutes harming someone else?
Yeah.
Now let's talk about positive liberty. So positive liberty has to do with cultivating a good life and autonomy. So again, doesn't mean positive in the sense of like good, right, or the best or correct or something like that. It has to do more with the negative conception for these folks isn't enough. It's not just enough to have no constraint. We as a society have to try to do what's good or right to better civilization in some way. We can't just leave people without that piece. So the idea here is, famous examples would be Social Security, food stamps, welfare, things like that. And there are different varieties of this, of course, but the idea being that someone's life shouldn't come to ruin through no fault of their own, right? Someone gets an acute medical incident, they're hit by a car that ran a red light, and all of a sudden their life is in shambles because they're drowning in medical debt. So that would be one example. Now you could have more robust examples like we should teach people to, eat the healthiest or to learn certain things or things like that. But that's kind of the idea. Now, pluses and minuses here, the government, the pluses you might say are that the government can help us achieve self-actualization via things like healthcare or education or anti-poverty measures. A famous argument on this side is, well, look, how free can you really be? You might technically have the freedom to leave your job, but if you're living below the poverty line and the only way you get healthcare is via your job, how free are you? So that's where the discussions really kind of hit the road.
Yeah.
The minuses, of course, are the exact opposite of what they were in the negative liberty case. So nanny state, paternalism, potential authoritarianism. One other thing to point out here that's very important in philosophical discussions is that the burden of proof very squarely lies on the person who wants to argue for positive liberty. They have the intellectual work and ground to cover to argue for this. Yep. It's not saying it can't be done. It's just to say that, like, negative liberty is the baseline. We can all agree to that.
Hmm.
And if you want to say that something like, everyone should have healthcare so that healthcare costs don't go up for everyone, or everyone should have car insurance, or people shouldn't, smoke in a crowded bar, you need to be the one providing objective, empirical, verifiable evidence to substantiate that claim.
Yeah. So I guess that's what my word was on optimizing, right? I got to define with a really strong argument what optimizing is, basically, right? Like what is optimal and what's my argument for that? And another example to the negative liberty thought I was thinking about, which, and again, that's why it gets complex and it needs to be stretched out, is I gave you the example, remember, offline, right? I think there's another topic where I was like, well, how about things that we can't even connect that have impact? So maybe the teacher that my child spends, or the avatar of a teacher that my child spends, 45% of their life up to 18, they don't believe in health and fitness. So now there's a rub. I'm saying, like, now in an institution that is, whether you like it or not, is directly influencing my child and their perspective on what a bigger life is, et cetera, I could say in a deeper argument that I can argument against that intention on what their beliefs are. Do you see? So you can see how it doesn't look like it's impeding on me directly, like it's not my shit and it's not my problem, right? But maybe it's an institution that's set up that doesn't lead it towards what I would like my children to hear in terms of this optimal goal for health and fitness. So you see what I'm saying? Like, and depending upon where you're coming from, you would be like, dude, that's a weak ass argument. Your children have education. I could see that, but I think that's probably the area that just seemingly, and again, for me, in my mind, it brings us back to, well, why do it at all if there is this lived experience that we see and people are not participating in this optimization, right? And people, and there's a shit ton of people who are not. They're not going after a really robust, fully expressed lifestyle. They're not going after that. And our only definition of a great life is standing up and shuffling with medicine at 86. And because you're standing up at 86, 86 is the score for mortality, right? That's lived.
Right.
And I'm saying maybe 67 is awesome. And really lots of lived experiences up to 67. Anyways, I just use that number because it's different than 86, and 67 seems like a short lifestyle. Yeah.
No, and I would agree with you that that's really the crux of the issue and where the arguments have to be made about, like, what constitutes harm. So, like, famous example, not to take us too deep down a rabbit hole, but gay marriage is a famous one that people will bring up here. Someone saying, well, I am offended by the idea that two people would do something against my personal conception isn't sufficient for harm. And that's really the crux, is that and I'm using that example not to just hammer on that example, but to point out the fact that unless you want to go back to, well, no, let me rephrase this because it's going to come off a different way.
You can't go into this one without going.
Well, no. So hopefully this will make sense. So in a modern democratic society, in a pluralistic society where we have Hindus and we have Christians and we have Jews and we have people who don't believe anything at all, not don't believe anything at all, but don't have theistic beliefs. That's the better way to put it. Or people who are Democrats or Republicans or different ways of thinking about things. There's a certain extent to which we need to be okay with there being different conceptions of the good that are ultimately incompatible because they're not all saying the same thing.
Yeah.
And us going about our lives. But that's really where, again, we get back to this question of to what extent can those, interplay with one another, and what constitutes harm, and are my beliefs okay? Are they not okay? Those types of things. But I think that's really where the argument takes place.
Yeah, no, that is a great man. And it just opens my mind to so many other really challenging conversations based upon that, and I don't really know what to use as a base support for my own mental faculties to use in those arguments. Like I just don't have enough. Like I haven't had enough experience in reading and understanding and living to really try to find some heuristics inside of like, well, how do you navigate these challenges, right? How do you work your way through this? I think this is where the strength is in philosophy, but it's also where it becomes like just maddening, and that you want to have some kind of direction, right, to it. And again, I think we just get always tripped up in our own beliefs.
Yeah, but I think, I think there are, I can totally understand how the philosophy side can be like, oh my God, there's just so much stuff. But there are ways to get a handle on this and to even maybe argue for what you want to argue for with positive liberty. You could make arguments, like JFK made, along the lines of better citizenry, able to pursue the good in kind of the best possible way. Other things you could do that we'll talk about when we get into more nitty-gritty positive liberty is it doesn't always need to be as aggressive as laws. We don't need to outlaw Cheetos, right? We don't need to outlaw cigarettes, but we can say, well, given the health impact this is going to have, we're going to tax them. Or we're going to give you tax breaks for going to, you know what I mean? So there can be different ways that you can guide things, and that's its own debate too,
Yeah.
but without having such heavy infringement upon, okay, Cheetos and Big Gulps are gone.
Yeah.
So there are different ways you can kind of navigate that.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Would electric cars and the tax rebates on that be a slight example of moving into that area, like trying to figure out how, and not taking any sides of like, how much electrical cars, impede on the grid as well. But I'm just saying, I think that's a movement, probably an investigation of something we should watch, right, for the next 10 years or so.
Yes, that would be a perfect example. When we're talking about environmental stewardship and the extent to which government should be involved, yes, the burden is on the government to show that there will be harm that comes. And, if we have these objective, empirical, verifiable studies that show that there will be harm, having tax breaks, let's say, for solar energy or electric cars or what have you, in such a way as maybe guide this positive behavior for the overall collective good of society. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. It's still going to end up, I think, as an example too, for that, it's still going to end up in, it's just still going to be a lot of questions inside of it, using that as an example.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. That's why I always, Robbie, I don't know if it's always because I play that in my mind all the time, not with just electric cars, but just in terms of the fitness topic, especially. And, I just keep going back to like, well, why don't we just go after the observed things that are really positive about an optimized lifestyle? The positive liberty aspect of things, right? And why don't we just work super hard to come up with really strong arguments for proof of that? And I think getting into that area is also probably safer. I would say, and because you're not, I guess, to even use that word, it is more positive, in concept, because you're basically just saying it's, you could still do what you want to do, but we're telling you there is this thing, right? There is this thing, and there's a better version of you as a possibility inside of that thing. And we're just asking you to just try it, like try to move towards that. Full well knowing that it won't result in some unbelievable scientific data that's going to prove us correct, but God damn it, it's at least going to make, it's going to, in my mind, I'm trying to think about the words of how someone else will see it, but in my mind, it's going to be impactful,
Yeah, well, I mean, going back to, our discussion of, educating kids from 5 to 18 to be autonomous in their fitness practices. One thing I haven't mentioned yet that's hugely relevant here, that kind of ruffles the negative liberty folks' feathers sometimes, is kids, right? So even if we all agree that, Cheetos shouldn't be outlawed, or that you should be free to wear a bike helmet or not wear a bike helmet or a seatbelt past a certain age, that's certainly not the case for kids. Generally the agreement is, well, look, if you're below the age of reason, you have to wear a seatbelt and you have to
Yeah.
wear
Yeah.
a bike helmet and, and things like that. So one way we could, talk about your conception of trying to guide this is we could say, well, look, at that developmental age, we're going to teach you how to eventually pursue this long term. What you do at 18, that's up to you.
Yeah. Yeah.
But we can guide it that way.
Yeah. I'm laughing because we said this on the call the other day, or mentorship call, where I was, I don't know, we got to a point in the conversation where I was like, man, humans, older humans, or let's call it maturing brain humans, should take a test and have some kind of governing body that says you should or should not be a parent.
My mom always used to say that.
Think about that, right? Like, that of course sounds very tyrannical, but and dictator-like. But that's not what I was getting at. It's just that to solve for that, which is the younger mind that can't make those decisions. And listen, Doritos at age 6 tastes really fucking good, right? Like, man, come on, it's nothing like raw broccoli. Let me tell you that. No matter how good your primal, turkey avocado oil thing is, it's not going to make it. It just isn't. I mean, there's systems set up at the right height for the Doritos and the taste that's like mind blowing. Trying to give you an insight into like trying to shift that 6-year-old brain is like, forget it. So you do have to ask who has governance over that situation as a child. And this is where it gets into the concept of parenting, the concept of reproduction, the concept of offspring, the concept of, we'll use the terminology today, it's a little bit more misunderstood, but the nuclear family concept. And deriving all the habits and building all the things inside of it for that young mind that doesn't have a super amount of freedom, but you're setting them up to give them the opportunity of exploration and choice at a point in time where they observed all these, let's call it good pieces in place, right? The good pieces in place. And so I agree. And that's why it gets, that's why I, of course, just went to the quick, idea, Robbie, of like, just put it in all their heads from age 5 to 18. And I'm telling you, you won't need fitness coaches and you won't need, all of that stuff that's done after 18 years of age. And I'm not saying that too, just to back up on our previous conversation, to say like, let's just forget about adults, they're lost, and just let them figure shit out, with the old saying, like, you're a fucking adult, like figure it out, right? Like, you don't know what weights to choose. Oh, you don't know what weights to choose, oh my God, like this is the end of your week. Think about that, right? You're a fucking adult, figure it out. But when it comes to kids, they don't know what weight to choose, right? And they don't know what upper pushing means. And they don't know how that relates to them fitting in, and so you need guidance on this, and you need an adult brain that is going to allow them to kind of figure those things out and solve problems such that they're starting to come up with what is right and what is something that they can like practice and have inside of them as habits that like, man, yeah, I discussed with my girls, not to virtue signal what we do at all, because we're not the greatest parents. We try to do as best we can. We get them to, when they like sleep over and have some shitty food at their friend's place, the next day they're tired and they're not feeling good and they feel a little sick. It's like, well, let's talk about how that could have happened, and they get to a conversation of like, yep, I reverse engineered it back, and, I probably shouldn't have had what I had for those foods, and I could have probably looked at other options, but these are the emotions I was feeling when I wanted to make those choices. And these are the repercussions that I have from that, right? So you can see that we're just giving them the opportunity to like, you are going to have to figure those things out, right? Based upon the choices you have. But here's the thing, right? This is the catch. But for the next 6 days in this house, this is what it's going to look like. Do you see that? So, and that looks like, authoritarian, but no, that's a responsibility that I have to provide for them what I believe is the best choices, you know? And this is the thing. It's not complex. Like that's like like to your point is like, oh, James, the best choices are not hard to, oh my gosh, the best choices are out there. Like it's all available and accessible. And this is where, of course, why I do what I do every day and why we're having this discussion is to try to create higher levels of education and awareness around these choices that are available, you know, and what does that pathway look like? So sorry for being lengthy on that, but
No, you're totally fine. And I think that analogy, I mean, the parent analogy that you put up there is exactly the crux of the issue. You know, you said for the next 6 days in our house, is the government our parents?
mm-hmm.
That's exactly the crux of the issue. If you had to put it into a metaphor,
Mm-hmm.
that's it.
Yep.
People who believe very strongly in negative liberty will say,
yep.
In a modern, democratic, pluralistic society, we all have different conceptions of the good as adults, and the government should not have any role in telling me what my conception of the good is, so long as I'm not harming someone else.
Yeah.
Whereas the positive liberty conception, depending on how far you set scales, will go from secondhand smoke all the way to we should be forcing people to eat a certain way.
Yeah. So this is what I would ask for those who really think hard about this is, you know, and again, this would be a thought experiment that's uncomfortable, but you know, what would be so wrong with the government forcing everyone to wake up and for an hour to participate in physical challenges? Like everyone had to do it. You know, what's your argument against that? Like, are you really like, cause I need to see it. I need to see the list of the 5 things that are saying, what's the downside of the government regulating us to get up and have physical challenge participation? You know, because I'm not, of course, I'm biased, right? I see all the virtues inside of doing physical challenges every day, and you know, breathing and being outside and opening my mind, etc. And all of a sudden, it's like, no, you have to do this, and you're disagreeing with the have to. Okay, but what's the problem with proposing it as an idea? You know, and if you're like, oh, you know, it's like you really don't have a super strong argument to that. Are you arguing only because you're saying that you shouldn't have to do it? That's not strong in my opinion. That's not strong in my opinion for what the observed positives are and what we've seen in evidence over time of people having this, you know, this even an incorrectly aligned intention towards exercise. After months and months, they're like, you know what? I kind of don't mind this. It kind of like opens up my mind for the day and it sets me on this path. And I feel, you know, I'm making better decisions in the afternoon. I'm choosing broccoli over Doritos now. Why? Because the government intervened on this hour thing that we just are expected to do every day, right? And so that's an uncomfortable thought experiment, right? But because immediately people immediately think about like, you know, the horn goes off and everyone's up like doing the doing the Ki Chong, you know, movements led by Robbie and Brandon. And we're all like, yeah, you know, good to go. Get out there and make us money and to push people through the system. You know, that's not what we're saying. So anyways, an uncomfortable thought experiment I've had before is like, why don't we just get right to the chase, force people to actually do it with no impedance, meaning there's no cost impedance, right? It's just their time. It's just their time and their energy that they have in order to do it. And you got to do it. You got to do it. And it's community run and it's well accepted. We all come together and we all do it together. And it's for that purpose, right? Of just getting people up to speed on physical expression.
So I have a couple of thoughts.
Sure.
So you're wondering what would be the potential arguments against. So again, this is where sometimes I think people get tripped up. No one here is denying the benefit of, you know, an hour of fitness in the morning and the benefits that would come about as a result. But maybe 2 potential arguments you could have about whether, you know, that should be instituted legally or not. So number 1, that is routinely used in the negative liberty case is the ability of the government, or let alone anyone, to really know to what extent, you know, something is good or not. But we could even set that aside for a second and say we know. You
Yeah.
know, let's just say we know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Even if even if we do know, though, that is an infringement upon autonomy. It is an infringement upon liberty. It is, you know, saying that the government's conception of the good needs to be your conception of the good, and you, it's not just that you have to refrain from doing something, you actively have to participate in something. And we may say that that something is good, eating healthy is good too,
Hmm.
but the government shouldn't necessarily impose it. So those would be a couple that I can think of that might,
Yeah.
I don't know if you have any thoughts one way or
Yeah.
the other.
Well, no, I'm agreeing that, as I said, there's lots, there's lots, I should say. I do still need to, like, you know, stretch them out in conversation with people, but yeah, and in my opinion, they're not good enough, right? But that's just my perspective for it. But I know there's lengthy arguments based upon that, and you know, I go to another crazy notion idea on it. Again, it's based upon, you know, uh, working hard and doing physical challenges. Like you and I, Robbie, know it's an unspoken thing, but it doesn't necessarily lead to something, right? Like that, it's not functional, right? The actual physical hardening that we're doing, it really is still just dance and folly, right? Like, I mean, the actual physical challenges that we do, um, we're not doing them because in a later part of the day, we may need to, like, fend off something. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's another, I'm aware of that. And so that's why it's probably not Ned Block's concepts of the zombie experiments, but with the zombie experiment in my mind is that, you know, if we had, you know, 1/10 of our population were zombies, that, you know, we all knew for like 100 years, we all knew that 1/10 of the population were zombies, and we all knew how to, like, live with them, meaning, like, there are times that when, you know, you're just, everyone that's being pumped out of the womb, you're coming out knowing, and you're in this society now where everyone recognizes this, you're going to have to be able to run a mile, because zombies can only run 800 meters. I hope you're staying with me here. I just came up and thought about it. Man, some people are lost on this one. But just think about this, right? Another hypothetical, right? We all recognize that, you know, there was this, like, we had to be able to run a mile flat out. Like, and why? Because if you can't, and you can't carry your child for a mile flat out, you'll be taken by zombies. Right? Why? Because they just die out after 800 meters. Like, it's just something, you know,
Just
something.
explode.
Yeah, yeah, they explode. They have this internal combustion problem. You know, this governor issue. They get to 801. It's like beep beep beep. They don't even know what's happening. Right? It's like, what the hell? Boom. And humans are like, haha, you know, we know this, and we know something that you don't even know, but we've observed this because it's 100 years experiment. You know. Anyways, but you see what I'm saying? If that was the case, do you see how it would change up, like, what we do as a physical expression? Like, you have to be able to run a mile flat out. You have to. Why? Because you can't survive if you can't run a mile flat out. And this, of course, crazy idea, thought process brings us back to your good point is like, well, why do you really need to do it? And if you're asking people to forcefully do it, you are going to have some strong arguments to say, like, I don't need to do this shit, like a bunch of push-ups and pugilism, when my afternoon is like just punching keys on a computer. Like, I'm not connecting whatsoever how that's going to be effective for me, you know? So sorry if that takes people down like an unfortunate, you know, area of thought or practice, but you know, we're trying to come up with ways to make people inspired around doing exercise. You know, this is the way to go about doing it.
No, and I mean, philosophy is chock full of very detailed thought experiments, just like those, where it's meant to highlight something. Yeah, I mean, in that case, you can, you know, in that, you know, example, it actually brings up a good point that's related to this debate about, to what extent does self-harm play a role in what we legislate and don't legislate? So in the zombie case, for example, like, you're going to die if you can't run a mile.
Yeah.
And then the question is, even there, you could still ask the question, well, if someone's like, I want to die, okay, well, that's up to you.
Yep.
That's where we get issues around, euthanasia and what have you.
Yeah.
But it really does get to an issue of, especially in the health and fitness realm, when we're talking about positive liberty and necessitating, someone eating healthy or someone working out for an hour in the morning, it really does get to this issue of self-harm, because you really got to draw some thick red yarn to say that someone not working out is harming someone else. It's possible, it's abstract, but so self-harm in this debate is very important. I think almost everyone agrees that we should have laws and or taxes in place to prevent against people physically harming each other, either via drunk driving or secondhand smoke or punching someone in the face. It gets tougher with seatbelts, bike helmets, eating Doritos, stuff like that, because you are harming yourself. And then we have to get to that question of, should the government conception of the good be your conception of the good?
Mm-hmm.
Or, how do those two tussle? So
yeah, man, I'm trying to balance out the emotions that I have around how exhausting, it is, without just like taking the red pill. It's probably the wrong, analogy, but just getting it over with and saying, I don't care what you think about it. I'm just saying, do this, it's so easy, right? Like, I mean, you can just see it's in my emotions. It's like, it just gets so drowned out in all these options that are just seemingly, it just seems so simple, because it's right in front of us. I can't pull the quote out of the book, but as I'm just thinking about that, about all this area of investigation that we need to do in order to come to an agreement, really, if not an agreement, just, laying thoughts out. It was a Michelangelo thought, as to how Michelangelo saw, the sculpture, or the thing that he was going to sculpt, right? Where he would say things like, or he mentioned that inside the rock, it's already the embedded, the thing that I'm going to sculpt. And the whole practice is actually just tearing around all the limitations around what's already embedded inside.
Right.
So this is where, I keep coming back to, is the problem really, Robbie, that we have not done a really good job of making people aware of these freedoms of physicality they have? Like, maybe we haven't made people aware of that, like that art piece of art that's inside of every person, that we just haven't given them the opportunity to, like, say that you have this opportunity to sculpt this thing, and I think that's where I have lots of interest in that. Have we done a disservice for a long period of time in waking people up to this? Like, you have it within you, it's within you. And if you want to argue over that one, I don't know what else to do, but, that's, and if they don't get it, well, maybe we need different mediums to get them to understand it, right? Like, get them to recognize, just some father who goes into the gym and after 9 months is deadlifting 150 kilos, right? Like, to the person who doesn't understand anything about fitness, is like, wow, for Robert is like a beast. And we need to go, no, did you know that all humans have this capability of expressing themselves physically, right? We have this inside of us, right? And we don't know why we've been given these unbelievable opportunities to express ourselves, right? With these cognitive and physical limitations long term, right? Of like deadlifting 500 pounds 5 times in a row, But we can do it. You see what I'm saying? And so every person has an optimal deadlift. I'm just using the analogy of the deadlift, right? Every person has an optimal deadlift that they could get to. And again, what I'm saying is that maybe we haven't done a good job of educating people that, number one, 2.5 out of 10 is just not enough. It's not enough. And you do need to know that there's a 9 out of 10. And it's sweet. There's lots of good shit on the other side of that. And I just don't think we've done a good job of, through experience or storytelling or examples, of what that could be like for a lot of people. And we end up in this area of really asking, is fitness good for most people? Like the fact we're,
Well, I think what you're mentioning is definitely a potential where the positive liberty argument can gain some traction. So you might say something like, and there's a spectrum, of course, if like the government mandating like 1 hour of fitness in the morning for everyone on penalty of taxes or imprisonment or something like that is the far end of the spectrum.
Yeah. I didn't even talk about the I didn't even talk about the repercussions. You know what the repercussions is? A second hour. So there,
So that, that could maybe be the far end of the spectrum. But I mean, to your point that you were just saying, like there could be a very real sense in which it is the role of the government to make people aware of this potential, make people aware of the goods that come inside this. And this can go back to the kids idea where you're at least making people aware of the potential. Now, I think you and I would both agree, and this is where, again, that we come back to that idea of a pluralistic society. Some people, even when faced with all the knowledge, they're educated just the best way, are just going to say, fuck it, I don't care, I'm not doing that anyway. Mm-hmm. And that's okay. That's what we get in a free, democratic, pluralistic society, when they get to being an adult. But I do think, your point about at least making kids aware and showing them that this is a potential and it holds so much good. I think that's one way you could go. I think another way you could go is that doesn't infringe upon people's liberties really in any sort of serious way is, should the government play a role in providing physical fitness facilities the same way we have, public skate parks and things like that. And then a last thing just on this topic is, maybe this conception of fitness that, you're trying to carve out where we make people aware of it and guide them towards it, maybe it's just better served by a non-governmental organization. Maybe government just isn't, government can be good for certain things, but maybe it's better as a NGO, like something like that. So just some thoughts there.
Yeah, for sure. On the last one, and we're participating in that with Noble Clay, who's Ben Davis and his group out of Atlanta, who are, I guess, just really digging into that concept, right, of fitness being served to everyone, and everyone should have access to that capability. So there's lots inside of that. That's unbelievable learning for us and educators within fitness. And to your point on the like skating parks, see, that's the funny thing is that I think that the competency and the accessibility, so it's available. So the availability for participation in recreational activities and leisure pursuits, dare we say, like health and fitness, again, we've made it super complex, largely for commercial interest, right? We've created rigs and equipment and classes and stuff for multiple different, intentions, I think, that are moved further and further away from this, fitness for longevity. But I think that those things are available. So, parks and nature and just walking, the basic concept of walking and maybe building things or lifting rocks. Like I used the example, right? If you're complaining about having equipment, just go for a long walk and lift some rocks, right? So there's lots of I would say argument for just, again, this comes back to our responsibility. We're not making people aware of the fact that this is accessible for these really simple practices. But again, you're always going to bump up against, a couple of things there. I just keep thinking about the kid who gets involved in exercise because they see a LeBron James commercial, and then they, get further down the road and they recognize that they were getting involved in that for the wrong reason. It was the athletic pursuit, and then it falls really short and they get really upset, right? And it's like, yeah, but you were supposed to get involved in it for just the physical expression. And the reason why I mention that is that we have these, systems that are hijacking that, really virtuous concept, right? Of the, like the athletic pursuit. Everyone's jumping on top of that as like, but James, we'll get people moving. And I'm like, it still ends up in the bad ending, right? Because they come inside with the wrong intentions, right? And so this is where, there's not a lot of huge promotion of, a member in your gym, Robbie, right? Like a member in your gym who's a father and a husband and has a job, right? And there's not a lot of promotion around their experience, right? And because it's not that exciting, right? And that these are some of the issues you're going to get into when trying to propose, like, what does that model look like? It's always going to probably lean up against something that has to be sensationalized or really, really sexy in order to be worthwhile. And it doesn't seem too exciting. So there's just some of the issues inside of, going down that route, trying to build up this idea.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think a couple of things. One would be, again, going back to ways in which government could promote these things, but without infringing upon people's liberties. I mean, clearly as a society, we have certain people we look up to that we think, hey, are, examples of virtue or examples of the good life, whether it's, the founding fathers of America or people who led the civil rights movement. Could there be a similar thing for fitness and health that we, talk about in schools and things like that? So yeah, I definitely think that could be a way in which you could foster the positive cultivation of it, but again, without infringing upon anyone's liberty one way or the other. It's just pure education to kids and things like that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I just thought about that on our call the other day, is that, like, probably during JFK's time, he didn't probably have this person right next to him, but as he was talking about, hardening up society, right, and creating this, because he put it in some strong words that we're getting weaker and that we need to, like, strengthen this whole thing, right? And it starts from physical participation and how we're going to do that, right? And you could argue about how it's going to happen, et cetera, but they had these individuals probably on stage or right along next to him, and they weren't these people, but we used to have these individuals that would speak about all these virtues of physical participation, like Jack LaLanne, right? In a light that was like, you just do this as a recreational pursuit to search towards optimal. Now, Jack did some unbelievable physical things that probably not a lot of people could do, but he was someone that, no matter, he was a name, people, whether you liked it or not, you kind of looked up to him based upon authority of what physical participation was. And he was probably right next to, quote unquote, government in terms of, making sure that, all the things that we do and all the stuff that we ask of all of our people inside of our community and cities and states are abiding by these whole things, by saying, like, and let's not forget about health and fitness as a daily practice, but there isn't that today, right? I was indirectly, as a Canadian looking at Arnold Schwarzenegger and he's moving to politics, I was hoping that he was going to move through California up to having this seat, within government that would have said, like, and being super honest, right? Listen, I took drugs. Listen, I did bodybuilding, and listen, it's not about looking good naked, but this is what I'll tell you, right? Talking about a free society and having an opportunity to come in here and to participate inside the American dream is inside of you physically. And you can get this through physical participation, right? And this is how, and here's my story, and this is how, and I was hoping he was going to end up, like, in that seat, right? As this, like, virtuous, long, challenging life, physical manifestation, that we could all look up to. It didn't necessarily happen. So as I'm saying that out, maybe that's what we need to also think about is, saying these individuals that are in areas where people are watching, we could say things, I don't know why I thought of him, but Bear Grylls, Bear Grylls on the show,
yeah.
right? why don't we, just keep having the conversation with him and other people that are just like him in multiple different mediums to say things like, do you know what makes me capable of like doing all these things and discovering these things with other people? It's daily practice of physicality, right? Like he's not mentioning it, and then people have to just make assumptions or make presumptions. Like how does Bear at that age, after this many shows in the helicopter going across land, how do they do that? And we're not willing to have the conversation, right? It takes you and I going, well, I mean, he probably gets up and, has an egg shake and goes for a run. And what I'm saying is like, why don't we say that? Why don't we talk about it? Like he actually does physical participation and then say, if it wasn't for my fitness, I would not be able to do these things. Back to your point of like trying to come up with these remedies of invoking this, without pressure. It's just about opportunity. And with this opportunity and this choice you have, you can participate and look what it leads to. It allows me to do all these things that I want to do, Yeah.
And I think that may be where the opportunity lies, with like a Jack LaLanne or a Bear Grylls or an Arnold Schwarzenegger. Maybe people outside of government who maybe in some way or another get connected with it, who do inspirational things. Thinking about it, like when was the last time anyone listened to the USDA dietary guidelines? Do you know what I mean? Like when fitness guidelines and dietary guidelines get trapped in this bureaucracy and
Yep.
as we know,
Yep.
are comically wrong for long periods of time. That's one argument against them. And then the second argument is, well, even if they were right, people aren't listening to them.
Yeah.
So sometimes you need kind of this, non-governmental or outside something that people look to for inspiration, that maybe you can connect with government programs somehow.
Yeah.
Just thinking out loud there.
Yeah. And that's where we came up with, that's how in our bubble, we came up with basic lifestyle guidelines, right? Because we were like, well, we got to have something we're going to put our stake in the ground on that at least people can look to get inspired by, right? So you want to work towards what you just did there, right? Staying hydrated throughout the day, and develop habits that can get you towards that, right? We're not going to argue with you over sodium potassium balances and the cost of a home water system. That's not where we're going, right? We just want to talk about the concept of hydration, right? That's it. And then, get to an understanding based upon that. So it becomes that thought and that belief becomes embedded in you. You can pass on to other people and you know it for yourself, right? So I think that you just made mention of something that's really neat as a project, maybe, is to continue to push what would be considered really easily implemented guidelines that actually are its own research. Like if you participate in these guidelines, you'll see over time, like they'll become obvious to you. So you don't have to be sold on something and you don't have to be told something. It becomes your observation through your participation of it. And I think that does have to be messaged though. Like it has to be packaged and pushed out and messaged. And it's not going in the right direction, Robbie, I would say, is just an argument. One thing I would use for that argument, it's not going in the right direction, is the movement away from physical participation inside of education. And the average participation of a child per week for a simple measure like moving across land in a period of 20 minutes, right? So this movement across land has been measured through load measurements and et cetera. And it's very easy to just see it because, PE is now taken out down to like once a week or maybe even twice a week in the general consensus, right? Where it used to be like a daily practice. So back to my point, it's like, why don't we argue that point, right? I mean, it should be my child's physical freedom to do what they want physically. It's like, well, I don't know. Maybe if it's a practice that they do every day, when they're 18 and they get into the real world, they wake up and now they got a job and they're like, wait now, where is that physical practice thing that I need to maintain, right? That I just have inside of me that I've learned how to do that keeps me going to this thing. And now it becomes, you can see it's like an embedded lifestyle prescription that they don't even know why they're doing it. And that's why I fast tracked the idea. Just everyone's got to get up as an adult and work out for an hour. It's like, just get it over with, The
Band-Aid off.
Yeah.
But I think that is, especially with the kids case, that is where you can really gain some traction on like, no, this is harmful to their mental health. This is harmful to their, just like the development of their bodies to be in chairs for that long, for their attentions. For so many different things, you can make and as you've pointed out many times, I think you're right. Long term, like it can't just be those reasons that they're engaging in fitness. It's not just those. They
Yeah.
have to do it for themselves eventually. But like as a means of making laws and rules around what we do for kids and teaching them, you can make a pretty damn strong case that it shouldn't just be math, English, and science. Like you got to have some physical cultivation so they're not sitting in chairs all day looking at screens.
Yeah. And I think maybe that's where we need to start as the strongest argument. And that's why I have involvement with the Brand X method and the concept of what it looks like for this, education for physical change, because I backroom know that that's the deepest impact we can have, is to set those new minds up for this like great experience of physical expression. So, once they, get older, it's just inside of them to want to do it and do it with others.
Yeah, absolutely. So I know time wise,
Yeah, we're probably tight for time, and we did. I appreciate the definitions of the pluses and minuses of the negative and positive liberty. That really created or helped me in the language of the area. So I appreciate that, and I think we do have more to go on this. I think maybe you can tell me if that's the case, but I think we need to probably lay out some of those arguments for and against um, the positive liberty optimized concept. I think that's how I feel, anyways, is to lay out a bunch of different points on that, and dig into that. And I think there also was more in your document that we wanted to cover, that we could get to also.
Yeah, I agree with that. And the other one I'd be really super interested to hear, because I'll admit I'm confounded by it, but I'd be interested to hear your perspective, is should there be laws around fitness coaching,
Yeah.
and what are the
Yep.
pluses and minuses of that?
Yeah.
So love
Yeah.
to get to
Lots
that.
of ideas in that. I have lots of thoughts on that. So
Awesome.
till the next time. So
All right.
thanks, Robbie.
Thank you so much, James. Have a good weekend.
You too.